Is Thursday, September 17th, 2020, 5 o'clock p.m. We are once again on time. Our guest was on time. The YouTube gods have been sated with the sacrifice of the yearling bull that we gave them this morning. My internet connection is running okay, and the weather in Cape Cod has apparently not knocked Kate's power out today. So it is one of those days. But I have bad news. The Attorney General of the United States is stark raving mad. So nothing about the news stories about this speech that he gave last night to Hillsdale College quite prepared me for the Q&A of the audio, which is not publicly available, and it took me all day to get it. And now I understand why Hillsdale College and the U.S. Department of Justice have not made full video about this available. The man seems like a lunatic. And
tell us more. I want to know.
I mean, he said that Black Lives Matter protesters don't care about Black lives. They only want dead Black people to use as props for a larger political agenda. He came out not merely against mass mail-in voting, but against basically all multi-day voting, saying that it basically eliminates the idea of an election. Let's see what I made some notes. He said that the press is more ignorant than it used to be, and that he'd be more tolerant of the press's partisanship if it were more informed. He spent a lot of time denouncing the word narrative. He doesn't like the idea that different people have different narratives of things. He complained about people who believe coronavirus policy should be dictated by science. He raged against World War II education. And he insists that
World War II education, like that no one during World War II should have been educated, or that like
no about our education about World War II. He doesn't like, apparently he saw somewhere that people only knew two things about World War II, about concentration camps and that we bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And he said, well, at least people knew about the concentration camps, but was then told that they meant the internment of Japanese Americans.
Has he met the president that he works for and his knowledge of World War II?
I don't know. I, as they say on Fox, I report, you decide. These are all things that the Attorney General of the United States discussed in the Q&A last night. I have to say it was a little bit like watching a very erudite version of your sort of mythical racist uncle. You know, like, it was genuinely surprising. Like, even to me, who has, I've gotten used to the idea that Bill Barr is a bad actor who I'm like spend a lot of time, denouncing. I was pretty surprised by it. So all that said, we are not allowed to have fun anymore, because we have, among other things, an attorney general who actually said, and this is a quote, these so-called Black Lives Matter people, they're not interested in Black lives. They're interested in props, a small number of Blacks who were killed by police to achieve a much broader political agenda. That's your Attorney General speaking off the cuff. We are not allowed to have fun anymore. But in lieu of fun, we are allowed to have Bianna Golodryga with us. And of course, she is a member of that press that the Attorney General denounced as more ignorant than it used to be. So let's start there, Bianna. Do you feel more ignorant than you used to be?
What I am most frightened about is how numb I feel we've all sort of become to these kind of headlines that have, it's one thing to come from the President of the United States, which is a separate topic, but I think just Attorney General Barr deserves his own, subset of just unbelievable. Wow, what has happened to this man, right? I mean, remember when he came into the picture, even, you had conservatives and Democrats say, well, listen, he's from
I said it.
I remember.
I knew Bill Barr years ago. We were never close. But he was always a sensible.
Well, you're definitely not going to be after you said all these nice things about him.
I'm just quoting
you never
him.
Know.
As my old boss, Meg Greenfield, used to say, there's no greater disservice you can do a man than to quote him. And Bill Barr's speech yesterday is a good example of that.
But what stuns me is that, as opposed to some of the other sort of obsequious actors in this administration who, you almost feel uncomfortable for when they're put in positions of having to defend the president's comments, it seems that he almost revels or goes out of his way to make these kind of shocking headlines. I mean, you sort of dug deeper into what we have been talking about all day, comparing the shutdown from COVID to the only thing worse than, slavery. I don't understand the point he's trying to make by suggesting that the mayor of Seattle should have been arrested. These are just not normal. I mean, I know we've sort of, it's just making fun of the word normal. But you say this on a daily basis and it makes you wonder, like, what is Jeff Sessions thinking? Remember when we thought some of his actions were out there? You can't compare the two.
No, in fact, Jeff Sessions...
he looks like a bastion of sanity now.
Yes.
On the biggest issues, Jeff Sessions, I mean, look, he wants
He stayed within the rules, right? I mean...
He colored within the lines.
Yeah.
He recused himself when he was required to recuse himself, and he did not repent or try to undo that. And, he's got many faults as a human being, as a policy mind, etc. And I'm not at all sorry to see him, not be a senator again. But I do think at the end of the day, on the basic integrity matters of that he did the minimum.
And look, not to tout CNN, but if you go back and watch his interview, Bill Barr's interview with Wolf Blitzer, was that a week ago, 2 weeks ago, where, he sat for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and say what you will about him. He's an educated, smart man, right, who would know the laws of the justice system. And, to just with a straight face suggest that he doesn't know whether somebody can vote twice in North Carolina. And you have Wolf follow up with, well, no, that's the law. I mean, and you say, maybe, I don't know, I need to check. It's how he presents himself to the nation. I don't know if he thinks that this wins him points down in history. I mean, he's said publicly that history is determined by whoever writes it, right? And I don't know how he envisions himself coming out of this, but I don't know. It's
just the audio of this speech is much worse than the text released by the Justice Department. The ad libs all make things weirder, down to the very little things. So at the very beginning of the speech, the written text reads, there's just little things to make it more political. The great guarantees of the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to keep and bear arms, just to name the first few, are critical safeguards of liberty. In the presentation, he changed this to say freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and especially the right to keep and bear arms. Just these little things to emphasize red meat stuff. He ad-libbed some sort of attacks on the Bob Mueller staff. There's, and he brought in anecdotes that are, I'm all for ad libs, but they really do show where your thought is. And the ad libs here, I hope to be able to make the full audio of this available, because it actually seems like both Hillsdale College and the Justice Department are not doing it. And I do think the totality of this is worse than the sum of the news stories that have been issued.
And I think it's worth noting, and don't quote me, I believe it was an interview that he gave with the New Yorker. This was last year. So this was not even sometime over the summer leading up to the election, but I believe he was one of the first officials that I recall speaking out against mail-in voting and suggesting that there was something nefarious about it and foreign interference. And the reporter asked, again, do you have proof? What evidence are you talking about and referring to? And this was before COVID. So maybe it was the end of 2019. And it was one of those out there kind of, wow, I can't believe, he's addressing this and where's the evidence? And here's something newsworthy. And there wasn't. I think it went back to it's logical. Why wouldn't people interfere? Why wouldn't Russia interfere? They'd be capable. But if we go back, we can start putting the pieces together. He was one of the first people, not even the president, to start talking about this.
Yeah.
It's truly bizarre. Ben, we've kind of talked about this before, but what really made you kind of think that he that didn't see any of this coming? You've kind of said a little bit but I don't know why, but was never impressed by Barr and never thought that his record was, I kind of always saw him as kind of a loyal, albeit we didn't know rabid, but a loyal dog to whoever he was kind of serving. I don't know.
Well, I guess, my reaction to Barr at the time of his appointment was conditioned by a few things. First, remember that the background was that the acting attorney general was Matt Whitaker, which was a genuinely dangerous situation.
That's true.
And so the concern was not, is the question, is Bill Barr your choice to be attorney general? But do you prefer Bill Barr to the status quo? That was the first thing. The second thing was that the other people who were on the possibilities list for Trump were Judge Jeanine Pirro and Rudy Giuliani, right? And so one of these people had been attorney general, deputy attorney general, and assistant attorney general for OLC before, and the others were Rudy Giuliani and Jean Pirro. So that was the factors 1 and 2. Factor 3 was that Bill Barr is a person of significant accomplishment, and I don't know what's happened to him over the last few years, but he has served in three of the top positions in the Justice Department. His tenure as Attorney General and Deputy Attorney General the first time around were, with one big exception, which was his advocacy of the Iran-Contra pardons, generally pretty admired. He was a good administrator of the department. He was reasonably well liked among the career staff. And, the career DOJ veterans were all, not all, but mostly the people, the Preet Bhararas of the world were, had a very similar reaction to this that I did. We were all completely wrong. I think it's actually more because Bill Barr has changed than it is because we, got him wrong in the first instance. But it's possible he's been, kind of hiding it very well. He is also someone who was the GC of a Fortune 500 company, which is, something that you generally induces a sort of institutional conservatism in people. And so, were we wrong? Yeah, we were completely wrong.
I have another podcast for you because you don't have enough on your plate, but I do think what happened to, and insert, so-and-so's name would be really.
Call it what the fuck happened to?
You in your podcast, you can call it whatever you want. But
no, I love this idea. Can you?
That's amazing.
So who would you want to, who the fuck happened to, who would be the first 5 episodes about?
Well, look, isn't that what everyone said about, the first person I recall that always being asked about was Dick Cheney, right? And so right. Was it a heart attack or what changed the person?
He's still alive, isn't he?
Oh, this
Yes, he
is
is,
such
but
this is such a great idea, Bianna.
yes,
Yeah,
but
this is like such.
I mean, look, I don't
every
think it would
episode
be,
is a different person.
I don't think it would be PC, but I can send you, offline a list of names that could
Lindsey
be.
Graham.
I think I have like a bunch. Wait, or is it just like? Wait, I have a question. Is it like? Is it just? Are you imagining this as Bianna as like? What happened to get them to where they are today? Like
Yeah.
what
Like known entities, known people, and it's sort of, I mean, I see where you're going. It can just be, where did this person
thinking that it
go?
would be like whatever happened to that person, which
No, that's kind of more of a where are they now column.
Yeah, like a where are they now thing. But but that's a great idea. I mean, I kind of like both, but like I
think it's a replacement for, could you imagine if Obama did this, because we can't use that line anymore. Could you imagine if Bush did this? That's sort of, tired at this point. But
I love this idea.
Person,
yeah.
It's a really good idea.
About the genius of Bill Barr and sort of the bar being so low. The same thing happened with Ratcliffe at DNI. Remember, his name was initially thrown out. It's like, no, we can't. And then who comes in? Rick Grinnell. And then there's an even bigger no. So we go back to Ratcliffe, and he's sort of the accepted, okay, he's somewhat more establishment. And I feel that with Jeanine Pirro, the administration's giving us, here are your options. And none of them are great, but, pick one who has...
Kanye would be good.
Kanye. What would Kanye's role be in this administration?
I love this idea.
Yeah.
So back years and years ago, I had this, it was always a joke idea with my then editor at Legal Times, Tom Watson. And the idea was for a magazine called Investigative Obituary Magazine, which was the slogan. We never could quite decide whether the slogan was not letting the dead rest in peace or whether the slogan was because the dead can't sue you for libel.
That's
but
not true, technically.
Is it not? I thought you can't libel the dead.
I mean, their estate can come after you. Yeah, their estate can definitely come after you.
Well. Yeah. So maybe the first slogan is the
glad this didn't work out for you, Ben.
But the idea is, people die and they get these hagiographic obituaries irrespective of what assholes they were. And Investigative Obituary Magazine was going to be like, a corrective to, Kate Klonick died. She loved animals. She was, and this is like, actually, she was an asshole. Like, here's the story.
I think you should call it like obituary asterisk on the obituary or something like that. Like a really like a hard.
Yeah, they should give you the warning. Stop here if you want the unfiltered or filtered version.
I did.
Yeah, I love. It's kind of the sister publication to Whatever Happened to, or the podcast.
I really feel like Whatever Happened to really has to be What the Fuck Happened to, because that.
Yeah. What the.
Like.
Yeah.
Because like.
Whatever happened to is like year one of this administration.
Whatever happened to really does sound like a where are they now?
Yeah.
Thing. Like it does sound like a whatever happened to Sarah Palin, or like whatever like.
Yes. No, I hear you.
All right. So whatever happened to Alexei Navalny? How's he doing?
Well, luckily he seems to be, doing very well, much better than we would have anticipated, having been poisoned by Novichok. But the early indications that we received last week were that he was out of the induced coma, and he was off the ventilator, and there was still, question as to whether he was mentally sound and could speak and could hear. And then, within a matter of 48 hours, he posted, or I'm assuming his family, who knows, posted back onto Instagram photos of him with his wife and 2 children in the typical Navalny humor, which was great to see and read. But, he said, it's me, Navalny. I'm back. I'm off the machines. I'm getting up out of bed sometimes, and I recommend breathing on your own. It's great. So it was reassuring to see that side of him. And then now the latest news was that, his team, and I don't know that many people follow him closely, but he obviously is the number one, political rival, dissident in Russia and opponent of Putin's, but he's an investigative journalist, and he really has assembled a team of very smart, very tech-savvy producers and journalists with him who are able to dig up all of this dirt information. I mean, their research is impeccable on all of the cronyism and corruption at the top levels of the Kremlin, which obviously, has made him a thorn at Putin's side. But those same people, come to find out, part of his team that were with him in Siberia and Tomsk, stayed behind when I guess they weren't all on the same flight. And when they found out that he was sick and taken to the hospital, they went back, they hired an attorney there, or had an attorney with them, and went back to check his hotel room because they must have assumed right away that he was poisoned. And they checked everything in his room, took what they could. And there had been 2 water bottles in his room, and they had them sent to Germany when he did go. And the German forensics experts and chemical experts determined that there was the traces of Novichok in the water bottles. So it leads one to conclude what I always thought was a bit too much of a coincidence was how people would have known, how somebody would have known that he was going to stop at that cafe at the airport in Tomsk and have tea there, at what time and when they would lace the tea, how that would take place. Because if you're going to do this, you're going to do it, and you don't risk something like this. So it would make more sense that people actually, whoever did this, the perpetrators, would
infiltrated his hotel room.
Would have either by, passing as the housekeepers, and you don't even know that it came from the water bottles. It could have been on the doorknob or what have you. But now you can at least piece it back to his hotel room as opposed to the airport, which, under normal circumstances, you would think, given that Russia said they want to investigate, and every other European leader is suggesting that Putin investigate this, get to the bottom of it. If they really wanted to investigate it, they'd be very, be simple to find out looking at footage of who entered his room and how. But of course, we don't know that that's going to happen.
So help me out. This is a question I asked Alina Polyakova
I heard
on the Lawfare podcast, and I confess I find her answer somehow not entirely satisfying. So I'm going to pose the question, tell you her answer, and then see whether you agree or disagree with the answer. So the record of Russian intelligence or military intelligence using Novichok or other exotic chemical weapons to kill political opponents.
Didn't they use ricin?
Well, they used ricin in the Soviets used ricin in a famous case of a Bulgarian dissident.
Okay, sorry. Thanks, sorry, I forgot.
That was the umbrella.
Yeah, it was the ricin-tipped umbrella. And the beautiful thing about that attack was when he jabbed him with the ricin-tipped umbrella, he said, "Excuse me, I'm sorry." Which
I never heard that.
Which is so polite when you're murdering somebody.
Exactly.
But I mean, the recent history of Putin's government trying to kill people with Novichok specifically is pretty long now.
Mm-hmm.
It's multiple cases. The partner of the founder of Pussy Riot, the 2 people in England, Navalny. There are other cases as well. The number of cases that they've actually killed anybody with Novichok, I think, is 0.
Yeah.
And so my question to Alina was, is this because they're incompetent, or because this is one of the most lethal substances on Earth? It is
so traceable.
And so traceable, right?
And so traceable. Famously lethal. So how can they be failing over and over and over again to actually kill somebody? It's like shooting somebody at point blank range and missing. And
I
Alina's answer is it's incompetence. They're actually not very competent. And I
I don't
find
buy that.
that like somehow not quite satisfying. So, what are your thoughts? Is it that they're just not that good at this? Or is it that they're actually trying to send a message and not kill people?
So you're going to find my answer unsatisfying then too, because I tend to agree with Alina. And I think this speaks to a larger question of the sort of power vertical that Putin wants to proclaim and have a worldview of him having, and this brilliant mastermind who, he's not necessarily a strategist, right? He's more tactical. And I do think, look, they could have shot people, right? They have before on Politkovskaya and obviously Boris Nemtsov, right there in the middle of the Kremlin. And I do think there are two components. A, sending a message, right? You can act with impunity, and doesn't matter where you are, whether you're in Russian soil or, look at Litvinenko and look at the Skripals in the UK. And Karamurza, how many times has he been poisoned as well? What I think is, yes, it's a bit of sloppiness, but it's to send a message and to send and inflict immense pain. However Navalny comes out of this, I'm sure he's going to have some sort of complications. And he and Vladimir Karamurza, they were both healthy young men. And so I think that ups their chances of, somewhat of a full recovery. But it forever changes their lives. And I think the message being sent is, we can not only kill you when we want to, but we will kill you with, specifically hallmarked chemicals that can be identified back to us. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I mean, I go back to Litvinenko, and I do think that intent was to inflict as much pain on him as possible, because he ultimately did die. And that was months of excruciating pain for him to die. And so it wasn't a, bullet to the head and the back and done deal and that's it. But then if you look at the perpetrators and some of these, FSB agents and officers who, they had traces all over the airplanes with regards to even Litvinenko, and I think Skripal as well. Remember, obviously they put it on a perfume bottle and just threw it in the garbage. So I think the level of sophistication, while it's there in Russia, isn't always what is, the messenger as far as delivering these chemical attacks.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? And I just and I think that this is interesting. So just to analyze this as a person who knows nothing about Russian intelligence, I would say that to Ben's latter point, which is that they mean to fail and they mean for it to be a message that they've done it, there definitely seems to be, I don't know that they mean to fail, but it does seem that they mean for people to know that they are the ones either attempting or committing murder of these individuals, because you do not pick those types of methods without creating international attention for yourself.
Yeah, my point isn't that they mean to fail exactly. My point is that death is not the singular objective, right? And that it's more important to use something exotic that operates as a signature, and that they can also then deny. And so it's deniable and yet unmistakably identifiable who it is. This is not the Russian mob. This is not, his wife who's angry at him, right? This is Vladimir Putin and only Vladimir Putin, but it's deniable. And if he dies, he dies, but the goal is not necessarily that he dies. It's that he be attacked in this very flamboyant way that is that sends a message to everyone else, we will, Litvinenko you, or we will inject you with a rice and tipped umbrella, right? There's something dramatic about it that I think is more the point than the actual outcome.
Yeah, and if it's not this time, it's next, right? Sleep with one eye open, kind of a thing. I spoke with Gary Kaspar, who I know very well, and he said, that every single time somebody is poisoned, he feels more and more that his life is at risk because it's become so brazen. There are. I think over the last 3 years, specifically, if Obama was criticized for not doing enough, you can't even compare what this administration has done in response to Putin. So as we know now, after the Skripal poisoning, when the U.S. ejected some people from the embassies here and consulates here, Trump was actually irate at the number of officials that were sent back to Russia and sent back home, and he thought it was too harsh of a response. You could say at least, the European leaders are saying the right thing, but their words seem to just fall on deaf ears because there's no action to back them up. Nord Stream 2, the pipeline, between Germany and Russia seems to, that was on the table. That would have been a big strike against Putin, but it also would have been a big strike and it would have really hurt Germany as well. But until Putin actually is hit in a place and hard enough that he knows not to do these things again, he'll continue to do it. And what I think is most amazing and you could say stubborn, but and risky to say the least, is that Navalny plans on going back to Russia. He is not asking for asylum in the US or England or in any country. He wants to go back. It's clearly a country that he loves, and he hopes to continue his work in local elections and possibly one day running again. So I think that's to be commended. I also think that by doing what Putin did, what the Kremlin did, it knocks off the narrative that, he's untouchable, right? That he's somebody, it would just be too messy. It wouldn't be worth the risk and the fallout from killing him, that he would become much more of a hero for the country and for those of his followers dead than he is alive. The same was said, by the way, about others.
About Nemtsov in particular, right? He's untouchable, and he wasn't.
And he wasn't. At midnight, in the middle of the Kremlin, with all of the cameras they have there, and it took them forever to find perpetrators that we know they weren't the real perpetrators of his murder. So I think this is something that doesn't necessarily have much strategy to it, but it gets the headlines that the Kremlin wants to have out there. And what else is so unbelievable is just their response, as opposed to just, we'll investigate it, this is terrible, and we don't know. They turn things around. The latest word from the Kremlin and their, rationale for what happened was that he left for Germany having some sort of low blood pressure and metabolic issues. And when he got to Germany, the Germans were the one who gave him the Novichok. And so it's their fault. But to say that with a straight face from a, press secretary tells you how they really feel and the respect they have for governments around the world. They could care less.
So talk about your own story. If memory serves, you were born in Moldova. Is that right?
Yes. Yes. It was up until, I still think it is the poorest country in Europe now.
Wow. It's because you left.
All the riches with me.
But you grew up in Houston.
I did.
So what's the Bianna Golodryga story? How do you go from being a baby in Moldova to growing up in Houston to working for CNN?
So I'll give you the short version. So we came, I had nothing to do with it. I have fantastic parents who were very brave. And I was 18 months old and we came as political refugees in 1980. And back then in the Soviet Union, you needed to have both sets of parents agree to let you go. So my parents signed and my mom has a deaf sister and, her husband's parents wouldn't sign for her, which is why we just came, the three of us, as opposed to bringing the grandparents with us. So we came
and just a query, 1979, 1980 departure is a signature Soviet Jewish right? It's like that's right around when the spigot turned off. I think 79 is the
Right.
peak year for emigration. So was this
Wait,
part of the
why?
This was
I
part
actually
of
don't know this.
this was part of the, and I can't believe I'm forgetting the senator's name. It was like a Magnitsky Act
yeah, it
kind,
was a
very
Jackson
similar.
Vanik.
Yeah,
Oh,
the Vienna, yes. And so Soviet Jews were allowed to immigrate either to the US or Israel, which many of them did, other Western countries, and were allowed to leave Russia under this act, which why you see many refugees that arrived here most recently came anywhere between early 70s to 1980. And then that started again in 91, right around the time when Gorbachev left and Yeltsin came in. So the rest of my family
fascinating.
came in 91. So we
I did
came
not
in
know that.
1980. We were allowed to take $75 each. And so the three of us, and we lived like many other immigrants, Soviet immigrants, in Vienna and then Rome as we went through the immigration process. And then my parents, who were quite the contrarians, noticed that everybody was going to New York or LA, all the Russians that were leaving as well. And they didn't want to live with a bunch of Russians. They just assumed that, if we're going to leave our lives and start anew, that they wanted to assimilate. So everybody was going to Brooklyn and Brighton Beach, and they said no. So HIAS, is the Jewish Resettlement Agency, was they were taking care of our trip here and our resettlement. And so my parents just said, we don't want to go to New York or LA. We want to go somewhere warm. My dad was an engineer, and they said, okay. And my mom wanted to go somewhere warm. So they said, okay, well, there's a family in Galveston, Texas that would love to sponsor you. So my parents had Galveston. They knew Houston, obviously. They look on the map.
Sorry for the face.
Coming to America. Like they look on the map and they're on the globe, and there's Houston.
Have they heard of Palm Beach?
Right.
A lot of warm places that are friendly to Jews that aren't Houston.
Yeah, no. We walked off the plane, the tarmac, and so we landed in New York. And this is always a funny story my parents tell, because we landed in New York and it was May, and we stayed here for the night, and then took a flight to Galveston, and for some reason we got off on the tarmac, and my mom as soon as she got off the plane, like she was just struck by this incredible heat that she's never felt before in her life. It was like tropical, humid, and she turns to my dad and says, like, where did you bring us? And he said, oh, woman, you don't understand. There's no such thing as heat like this. It's from the engine of the plane. So as we kept walking, it was still hot. So no, the engineer was wrong. And we lived in Galveston for 6 months, and like fish out of water. We stood out like Thor thumbs. But my dad was 30, my mom was 25. They didn't have language skills at all, but it was sort of the American dream. She mopped floors so that I could go to kindergarten for free and nursery for free. Then my dad got a job in Houston as an engineer, and we moved to Houston, and that's where I grew up. My parents are still there. My mom is an executive at a Fortune 500 company. My dad is a successful engineer. And so, I mean, it's just when people talk about like only an American, what a country, and it's stories like that where it couldn't have happened in any other country, not to mention in just a short period of time in one generation. So they are, and what's frustrating to me as an immigrant. And obviously, you do make the argument. Of course, people want to come here legally. Of course, you want to follow the laws, and people wait for years to get their green card and for years to get their citizenship. But in terms of the immigrant idea and what this country represents, I keep telling people you won't find more patriotic people than immigrants, because for whatever reason, they chose to come here. It wasn't as if this country was handed to them, and people take that for granted, for better or worse, and whatever's going on in this country. So every day when I have one of these moments where, oh my God, the news, I just can't take it, what's happened to this country, it's my parents who cheer me up. Like, Bianna is still the best country, and we're going to fight, we're going to do this, blah, 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 this is the country, we have the Constitution, you have, you're a journalist, look at what you can do, think about being a journalist in Russia. Like, you're reminded of this, and it's inspiring without being too cheesy.
No,
anyway,
I don't think it's cheesy at all. No, and also you're not like getting to stop there, because I kind of actually do want to hear how you did the whole like then catapult to being a CNN journalist and doing your television career. But No, just to like kind of pause on that for a second. I think that we had an immigration attorney on who helps immigrants at the Mexican border in New Mexico. And she was kind of saying something incredibly similar, which is like, at what point do we as a global community recognize that we migrate? Like people are migrating and moving all the time because things get bad in one place and you have to go to it. Like it is better in another place, and like you need to do that. And like you have taken great risks to do that and sacrificed so much, $75 a person or whatever. I had a babysitter growing up that was like my main babysitter, and she and her family had escaped from Cuba, like on a plane, like, and flown to Spain to escape, like 4 or 5 of her siblings and her parents, and like had come to like this. Her father was a preacher, and he kind of like, anyways, like he had like a network of people that like hooked him up in Rochester, New York, with like a place to live, and that became his community. And they raised their kids there, and they loved it, and they became citizens. And my mom is a judge, and my mom swore all of the family in as like citizens. Yeah, and it was just like, it was wonderful. Like they were the most paid, also like, man, like it's just, I really do think that the diversity of like, I spent like a couple of years ago, like 6 months in France, and it's amazing. It's an amazing country. I love it. I'm a total Francophile. But at the end of my time there, I was like desperate for diversity of culture, diversity of food, diversity of like, just kind of how people looked. There was just like, there wasn't a ton. And so it was kind of like, it was one of these things where I was like, man, it is not to be super corny, but there are some really wonderful things that we forget about America.
It's uniquely American too. I know my mom, and it's funny that she pointed this out, but we were talking about this recently, where she said her favorite thing, like the most patriotic thing for her to see from coming from such a homogenous country. I mean, obviously in the Soviet Union, being Jewish, that was your ethnicity. So you were not Soviet, or your identity was Jewish. So everything from your passport to your library card identified you as a Jew. And obviously we know that doesn't lead to any place good. And here you have the opportunity to be an American with whatever religion, whatever heritage you come with. And her favorite thing that she said she loved seeing, and that was made her so proud to be an American, was two things. When I would come home with my class photos from school and the diversity that you would see in the photos, like you don't see that in any other country. So you have, Black students, Hispanic students, Asian students, and Caucasian students, and they're all together and they're all American. And I thought of that, and I go and I look at these photos, and it's so true. No other country has that kind of representation. And the same with our Olympic teams. When they're up there and they're getting their medals, and you see all the diversity, it's what represents this country. And so it's frustrating when people find that worrisome, or somehow anti-American, or impeding on what America is, because that is exactly what America is.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. People in the chat are kind of like pointing out that Canada has some diversity. And then,
no.
And then
yes.
London. And
yes.
This is not to say that there are like, yes, but I do think that I take your point. Like, I don't think we're trying to say this isn't a story of American exceptionalism. This is trying to kind of take a moment in an environment, a current political environment.
And I'm not even talking about today. I will tell you, in 1980, when we moved here, of course, America was always their first choice, even though we came on Israeli visas. We left the Soviet Union on Israeli visas. And this goes back to the point I was trying to make. And today, I believe things perhaps are different around the world. But then in 1980, America was the easiest country as far as the wait time to immigrate to. So people that were on the same, they left the Soviet Union with us, they were applying to go to Australia and to Canada, and it was much harder to go there than it was here. And so that's the point I'm making. Things have changed here, and yes, there are other great countries, and countries have diversity of their own. But I just mean what America really was, and hopefully can get back to as far as embracing. I mean, that's everyone learned about the Statue of Liberty, right? I mean, it's that's what made us different, was that we we loved that, right? We sort of wore that as a badge of honor.
It's really funny because, we're going to go and take a question from David, who is a loyal member of our audience. But before we do that, I was just going to say that someone said to me recently, so my mom's family is like from Sweden, and like the other side of my family is like ethnically like Ashkenazi Jew and like from like Ukraine. And I was kind of describing this to somebody from Europe the other day, and they just like started laughing at me, and they were just kind of like, it is really just Americans who like describe their entire lineage going back 3 generations of people as to like what they are. And like no one else does this.
No.
You have to, because there is just like you've got Germans marrying Irish, like, and like, but a lot of people don't do that. Mexican people marry Mexican people, like if they both live in Mexico. And like,
my mother has perfected Tex Russian food. I mean, her Russian food have Texas spices in them, and it's delicious. So
what does borscht taste like with Texas
it has,
spices?
she throws every single herb. When I would go to my grandmother's in New York, all the food was bland that I ate there because I needed a little bit of chili powder or what, she would just Tex-Mex it up, and it was awesome. It was awesome.
That's awesome. I love that. Fusion everything. That is what I say.
Yes.
Just like blended wine. I'm like such a. Anyways,
Mix it
David
all up.
Batts, the floor is yours.
Hi.
Oh, you're muted, David. Oh, you have no voice? Oh, sorry. No, you do. You just were joking. Okay, sorry.
There we go. Okay.
There
you go. Yay. Really great to hear your story and the story of your family coming over. Recently, reporters seem to be much more active in performing real-time fact-checking of representatives of the administration. Can you walk us through the pro-con that might be going through your mind when you are interviewing somebody and they're kind of bending or twisting the truth around? How do you decide when or whether to push back?
I think that's a good question. First of all, we are fortunate to have people like Daniel Dale, who is our fact checker extraordinaire on CNN, who will just literally 10 minutes after Trump says something, have a litany of wrong. So that helps. And I feel that we need more and more of that. And who knows what's going to happen during the debates. And I think Biden has even asked for a real-time fact checker. I don't know. But, look, as you prepare for an interview, when you ask questions, you have to do your research and sort of, get some understanding of the topic you're asking about. And you have a range of potential answers that they'll give you. If it's a, sensitive question or one that that they don't want to talk about, given who may be watching or what have you, they'll deflect or they'll use some of their other tricks. But, it comes down to a lot of the questions have to be those that the answer to. And if they don't answer, you answer it for them, So when you say, are we leading the world in coronavirus deaths, right, or cases or what have you, and they give you this long list of, the Kelly McEnany's, no, remember, look at this, and it's a distraction. They know that they can't be on air with you for an hour, right? You only have 3 minutes so you give them an opportunity to address it. And if not, you have to tell the viewers. And what's worrisome is that, you have to wonder how many open-minded people are even watching at this point, and we've become a nation that tailors our news, and people tend to flock to whatever silos and news channels they find most agreeable with, however they view the issues. So, at times you can feel like, oh, great, I'm glad we got those facts out and now viewers know. And then you ask, well, how many of those viewers were really on the fence, or how many of those viewers didn't know that going into it? And it's unfortunate that, I love that we have so many options in this country, but sometimes you do wonder what would happen if we only had the 3 main networks and you go back to just picking whatever, anchor or presenter appeal to you most because of their presence and not because of, what they're reporting.
It's so true. Like it's so like I really the presence of like a reporter is like I feel I'm sure that this is something that is like most of what talent scouts at all of like these at these places like think about. But yeah, I do think that like I think that increasingly like reporters, anchors used to just kind of be like, you know, reading scripts and not talking back. And like, I mean, I don't know, it's just a very different, way that TV has kind of shifted. I want to talk a little bit about something you've been reporting on in the last couple of months with everything that's been going on with the pandemic, which is remote education. And you had mentioned it at the beginning of the show, and you have two, I think you have two kids.
I have two,
Ben mentioned to me. Yeah. So I'm a professor and I am on sabbatical, thank God, honestly, like this semester. But I just talked to my dean and I'm like slated to go back and I'm teaching like what the simulcast between like two different rooms in person, and you know that's for law school. But I'm fascinated to know what you've been like reporting on for like every kind of area in education.
It's a mess. Look, I've been covering everything from, so I would say I started covering this beat in May. So everything from K through 12 to colleges. And every school that I spoke with, every superintendent and administrator back in May, their goal, their plan was follow CDC guidelines, right? And to use those guidelines over the summer to help train teachers for how to reopen schools in a pandemic. So it wasn't we're going to focus solely on improving online education, or I didn't even know what Zoom was prior to March. So imagine all of these teachers who were found themselves in similar positions. So that ended up being a sort of pie in the sky goal, because as we know, I think that the thinking was that we would get the virus under control and that a lockdown would be followed, and that we would get the levels to a place that are safe enough to reopen schools. And as every expert I spoke with said, the priorities, you know, from the first day schools closed in March until September 1st should have been, how do we reopen schools? Instead, it turned into bars and, you know, getting the economy going. And I get that. I understand that, you know, we were on the verge and potentially could still be of a depression. But you also have to realize that you're not going to restart an economy successfully when you don't have 50 million students at school. And that seemed to be the area that the administration just did not think about. I still don't know what the plan is. Betsy DeVos has been on our air on, you know, multiple networks, and there's yet to be a coherent strategy. And so each superintendent was sort of doing it on their own. I spoke with the Houston superintendent who had everything planned out, and guess what happens in June and July? Texas has a huge spike. And so every plan that they put into place now is sidelined, and they have to, in, you know, the course of 4 weeks, figure out how to keep students online. And what you're seeing is a greater divide between the haves and have-nots, right? And socioeconomically, families that can afford to have computers and can afford to hire tutors online and hire class pods and what have you are doing that. It's still not ideal, but at least they have the means to, and maybe their kids are picking up an additional project or language or elective. And then you have kids who, parents, you know, they have to go to work, they're essential workers, they don't have computers, they don't have internet connection, and they are lost and left behind, not to mention food and how many children go.
The food part is like so huge. Oh my God, people just do not appreciate how much we depend on public schools for lunches and for food for hungry kids. And like the only nutrition they get.
I mean, the number of abuse, you know, reports has gone down, and not because they've just stopped happening. It's because they're not reported anymore. And so that's a complete, you know, mess. And across the country, I think what you've seen happen in New York, where the infection rate is at 1% and schools were set to open Monday. You saw what de Blasio did today and continue to push it off another week, another 10 days to sort of, give the teachers unions and the principals unions some more time to work on their grievances. I don't know what you're going to be able to achieve in a week. You frustrated a lot of parents here. And I do think New York is, at least I can understand that's a risk worth taking because the infection rate is so low. Might as well try it. But other areas, I mean, you've seen what happened in Georgia and other schools where students are suspended for taking pictures of crowded hallways where people aren't wearing masks. I mean, the mask thing, and it goes back to Trump. If it is not a hard ask, it's not. My 4-year-old and my 8-year-old go to school. My 4-year-old is like literally will call people out for not wearing their masks. And I just let her do it because I think we should. If our kids can do it, our president can do it. And so that's the message. Well, yeah.
I think that like
I don't want to. Yeah,
it's like if our kids do it, then like our president might also do it. Like I don't know. There's just like,
and I don't understand his logic. Oh, I get tested twice a day, or I get tested, so I'm not at risk, and that's not the point. He has access to everything we don't. Like, we're not equating our lives. It's just the example he sets. And that I don't, I mean, clearly this is intentional at this point. But I will just say, so that's K through 12, and it's not going well. And then colleges, I think now looking back, were a bit too optimistic and sort of brazen, right? Because they, first of all,
yes,
they have, enormous, debts to pay off. And this is a financial decision on their part. I think you're going to see a lot of colleges go out of business. You'll see more mergers among schools as well, because financially they rely on tuition and students living on campus. But that having been said, every administrator I spoke with over the summer said, listen, unlike K through 12, we have money. We can afford testing. We can afford PPE and contact tracing. So we're going to have as many tests as we need, and we're going to be fine. And what they forgot or didn't assume or factor in was that students are going to be students on campus. And unless you turn them into fortresses,
there's no way. They're not
of college sports, right? I don't understand why the Greek systems aren't at least, shut down for the year, where clearly you're seeing parties either on or off campus. So that's becoming, they're becoming petri dishes. And now students are being asked to remain on campus instead of going back to their community where it can spread more.
Yeah, I think that those are all really wonderful points. So going back to K through 12, I do think that there are a few things that are going to happen, and we kind of touched on a few of these briefly, which is that you don't understand the social structure of kind of like what's taking place. So like the idea that that schools are childcare. I mean, the conceit is and has always been like schools are education, but like now we're seeing that they are like maybe like for the very, very, for a few, their education, and like most places that they have like parents or other types of people that can make up for it, they they can still keep learning and have education, and maybe even be better and like more advanced by having homeschooling. But no school lunches, no kind of monitoring of like what their home life or domestic life is like by outside parties, no kind of socialization that they get when they're like that age, no, all of the education that happens between students, between kids, like that, that they're not getting anymore. I just think that there's so much more about school than like the quote unquote like book learning or whatever else. Of course,
there's social skills, obviously nutrition, and then don't look at the impact it's having on the economy, especially the toll it's taking on women in the economy, where so many mothers, I mean, there are fathers out there, I know they're working hard and helping their kids out there, so it's a shout out to the dads. But if you look at just the numbers, forget anecdotal, if you look at the numbers, women have, I believe, have gone down. The unemployment rate was at 16%. Now it's around 8 or 9% for women, and women of color, it's even higher, because so many of them have had to decide to give up their careers, give up their jobs, to stay home with their kids. And it's a financial decision too, because childcare is very expensive. So you do the math, and sometimes in many cases, it doesn't make sense to go to your job to actually pay someone to come stay with your kid. That may be more expensive than having you just give up your employment. And that obviously from a financial standpoint and from, a personal standpoint. Your career is part of who you are. And the longer this goes on, the harder it's going to be for women to go back into the workforce.
Yeah. Eric, last question goes to you.
Hi.
Thanks. What in your mind is the best way, or way for that matter, to tell the difference between where the line between fact-checking and amplification of falsehoods lies? Like, what is the editorial decision making that goes into determining that?
It's such a good question. And, it's something we grapple with all the time, especially when you're dealing with the president, right? So do you not cover a tweet if it's outrageous, or if it's, one big lie after another? Do you not cover a speech? And you've seen many cases where news networks, including Fox at times, will even pull away from a rally or what have you and pull out from remarks that he's delivering. So it is a balancing act of, are we amplifying? But then you remind yourself, look, it's the Attorney General of the United States. It's the President of the United States. So I think what we have come to find out is that having some of the other outside actors, lower level actors and spokespeople for the administration and what have you, there's not much benefit to having them on all the time, and then you having to fact check them, and it just turns into the sort of waste of time. But I do think when it comes to focusing on the players themselves, you have to. We can't get to this place where you just become numb to it. And I feel in many cases we were there already. And you get a sense of what happened in the Soviet Union and in places where even Navalny, and I don't want to keep tying it back to Russia, but what stood out to me with Navalny, and I'm sure you saw this on the plane where he was sick, right? And there was audio recording and video of him just moaning and just sort of animalistic type of pain and moan. And you see every person on the plane who was in this shot was just like reading their newspaper, magazine, just going about. You would think that people would, be up in arms. Somebody's really sick. Who is this? And especially they would have known it's Navalny. And it's just turned into this indifference. And I fear that if we don't call things out as journalists here, even if it's, preaching to the choir or to like-minded people, you have to do it. That's your job. Right? I mean, do you disagree? Do you think we're amplifying by talking about it as opposed to just ignoring it?
I think that the world amplifies everything now because social media gives every single human a tiny little piece of the amplification puzzle, and things amplify themselves. And that because people of influence and power have recapitulated that power on social media, that they can publish it themselves and amplify it plenty. I think that I don't think that the news has a choice but to respond to that. And I think we would be in a worse position, honestly, as citizens, if we didn't know half of what had happened. Because everyone had just been Trump is insane, or Trump is doing or Trump is a racist, or Trump is. I think it's important that we talk about his racist tweets and then talk about why they're not true, or why they're why they're problematic, rather than acting like they don't exist to begin with. I feel that's the recipe for just a terrible outcome many years down the road, and maybe not even many years, but that suppression of information is something that makes people very upset.
Can I just add one thing? Oh, go ahead.
There is no way that you can not cover what the president says. And, I think people who are, the question of do you go wall to wall on a rally is a different question. But the idea that major media is going to just ignore the president of the United States is silly. And, people who want media to do that need to ask the question of, what they're really saying is ignore what we voted for. And the fact that we probably didn't collectively doesn't matter. We collectively as a polity did.
Sorry.
And there is no there's no alternative but to face that reality. Now, should you do it in a way that is non-stenographic and confronts what he's saying? Absolutely. But there's just no way when the president says something, foreign leaders aren't ignoring it.
Yeah.
Do you just want to put your head in the sand?
I agree. Here's my what I find is like the latest challenge over the past year. I think it's gotten worse. Is not just the president and the administration and holding them accountable, but it's other elected officials. So how many times have you seen interviews with senators, with congressmen, and respected people who are familiar with the story, right? They have their staffers tell them what the president tweeted, or they've read the articles that we're bringing up. These aren't gotcha questions. And when they come on and you ask about it, they say, I haven't read it yet, or I don't pay attention to that, or it's not and that sort of
I've made a point of not reading it yet.
Yes. Is that I find is sort of the next challenge of what do you do with that? Kelly Loeffler and a few other senators, I believe it was just this week, when asked to respond to the Woodward book and the tapes, respond by saying it's fake news. And what do you say to that? Because it's there. It's, tapes got people burned before. People, their careers were finished over audio and video recordings. And obviously in the past, credible press reports too. And now we're in a place where what you hear and what you see is being labeled fake news by prominent elected officials. That's the next challenge. I mean, we're here. It's not the next challenge. It's the daily challenge.
It's an ongoing challenge.
Yeah.
So I have escaped from the rendition that Bill Barr planned for me. I
feel very lucky that I got to spend so much time with Bianna, but I'm very sorry that you did not.
I heard it all. I
did something wrong.
No, it was like I kept meaning to say something, but then our conversation was just going.
It was just one of those situations where when you don't make an appropriate sacrifice to the crowdcast gods, sometimes they retaliate. And in this case, apparently the yearling bull that I offered them was enough to get us started.
Yeah.
But the smell of the smoke was not adequately pleasing. And so I was removed for a few minutes. Bianna, it's an incredible pleasure talking to you, and you should come back.
Wonderful. Please, I'd love to come back. Hopefully we can all three.
This was super fun.
This was fun. It was great to talk to you guys. I was nervous about this one, so thanks for making it easy.
Kate, who do we have for tomorrow?
We have Kate Starbird of the Stanford Cyber Center, and she's going to be talking to us a little bit about the disinformation research that she's been doing with Alex Stamos and Renee DiResta. So that should be really fun.
Fantastic.
That'll be great. They are a really, really strong group. And they do a lot of interesting work. That will be 22 hours and 52 minutes from now. And until then, we don't have fun anymore. But in lieu of fun, we still can leave Moldova with $75 in our pockets, grow up in Houston, and be part of this, really cool tapestry, and eat, Tex-Mex borscht, which...
He was listening.
I was there the whole time.
My kids are taking their Russian lesson right now. So we keep we are proud Americans, but we keep our heritage as well.
Yeah, that's so great.
I spent a lot of years trying to learn Russian and ended up with scattered words and phrases. And so I think if you grew up with native Russian, that is a very cool language to have.
Yeah, it is.
We will see you soon.
I'll see you soon. I'll see you on Morning Joe tomorrow. I'll watch when I'm not watching CNN,
Bianna, it was so nice to meet you. It was truly lovely.
Hopefully my camera won't give out then. Bye.
Yeah,
Bye. Have a good night.
Morning Joe.